this marriage will not work.
This marriage will never be real. Don't make the mistake of believing otherwise. Imagine standing in a designer wedding gown, the weight of your family's survival crushing your chest, only to have your new husband, a man feared across Seoul's underworld, look at you with eyes as cold as winter steel and tell you that every vow you just made means absolutely nothing. The door to the penthouse bedroom locks from the outside. The diamond on your finger suddenly feels like a noose. And in that frozen moment you realise the truth. You haven't just married a mafia boss. You've been imprisoned in a gilded cage where love is forbidden and hope is dangerous. Before the story continues, if you already feel her fear, her heartbreak and her fight, don't just watch and walk away. Tap subscribe right now so you don't abandon this story halfway. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Laura used to believe kindness could soften even the hardest hearts. That love could fix what life had broken. Tonight she learned how wrong she was. Ji-hoon didn't want her kindness. He didn't want her love. He wanted control. A man who ruled his empire through fear. A man who erased enemies without hesitation. A man whose name alone could silence a room. And now she belonged to him, sold to protect her family from men who never forgave debts. Trapped in a penthouse that felt more like a cage than a home. Watched by guards who never blinked. Married to a man who looked at her like she was nothing more than property. But what Ji-hoon didn't know, Laura had survived hunger, she had survived shame, she had survived watching her father beg on his knees, and she would survive this too, even if it meant cracking open the heart of a man who swore he didn't have one left. Even if it meant fighting back in a world designed to crush her. This is the story of a woman who refused to disappear. And the mafia boss who never expected her to fight back. Laura still remembers the smell of her mother's dumplings steaming in the back kitchen. Pork and chives. The kind of comfort that made you believe the world was small, predictable, safe. She was 22, working the register at her family's restaurant in a quiet corner of Seoul where tourists never wandered. Her father would joke that one day maybe they'd expand, open a second location. Laura would smile and nod, but truthfully she didn't need more. She had dreams, sure, simple ones. A little apartment of her own, maybe art school, a life that belonged to her. That was before the men came. It was a Tuesday night, late, the kind of quiet where you hear every creak in the floorboards. Laura was wiping down tables when the door opened. 3 men. Expensive suits. Cold eyes. Her father's face went white. She didn't understand at first. Not until she heard the word debt. Not until she saw her father's hands shaking as he tried to explain, tried to beg. He'd borrowed money, a lot of it, from the wrong people, and now they wanted it back. "I don't have it," her father whispered. "Please, just give me more time." The tallest man, silver watch, scar along his jaw, smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. "We're done waiting." Laura's mother was crying. Her father was on his knees. And Laura? She was frozen, watching her safe little world crack apart like glass under a hammer. Then the man's eyes landed on her. "You have a daughter." Her father's face twisted in horror. "No, no, please. Pretty girl. Young, healthy." The man tilted his head, studying her like she was livestock. "She'll do." Laura's heart stopped. She'll do for what? But she already knew. Somewhere deep in her gut she knew. Her father tried to refuse. He shouted, he begged, he offered everything, the restaurant, their home, his life. But it didn't matter. These men didn't negotiate, they took what they wanted. And what they wanted was her. The next 72 hours were a blur. Laura was pulled from her home, dressed in white, dragged into a sleek, black car that smelled like leather and cologne. No one explained. No one asked her permission. She was a transaction, a piece of collateral to settle a debt she didn't owe. She was brought to a mansion, cold marble floors, chandeliers that looked like they cost more than her family's entire life. And then she saw him, Ji-hoon. He stood at the top of a grand staircase, hands in his pockets, watching her with the kind of detached curiosity you'd give a stray cat. Tall, sharp suit, dark eyes that gave nothing away. He didn't smile, didn't frown, just looked. "This is her?" he asked, voice flat. "Yes, sir. Payment for the Park family debt." Laura wanted to scream, to run, to wake up, but her legs wouldn't move. Ji-hoon descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. When he reached her, he stopped, studied her face. She could barely breathe. "Do you understand what's happening?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "You're my wife now." The words didn't make sense. Wife? She didn't even know this man, didn't choose him, didn't want this. "I didn't agree to this," she whispered. His expression didn't change. "You don't have to." And that's when she understood. This wasn't a marriage, it was ownership. Ji-hoon turned and walked away, his voice echoing through the vast, empty hall. "Someone show her to her room and make sure she understands the rules." Laura stood there, trembling, as the door locked behind him. She was trapped. And in Han Ji-hoon's world, there were no second chances, no escape routes, only survival. The wedding wasn't romantic, it was a transaction dressed in silk and orchids. Laura stood at the end of a marble aisle that stretched impossibly long, her heart hammering so hard she thought the guests in the front row could hear it. The venue was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Seoul skyline, crystal chandeliers dripping light like frozen waterfalls, white roses everywhere. It should have felt like a fairy tale. But fairy tales don't have men in the back rows with cold eyes and hidden guns. She recognised the type. Her father had entertained men like these her whole life, sharp suits, sharper smiles, the kind who shook your hand while calculating how much you were worth. Except here, they weren't just guests. They were predators in tailored wool, watching her like she was the main course. Ji-hoon waited at the altar, impossibly handsome in his black tuxedo, his expression unreadable, no warmth, no reassurance. Just that same calculating look he'd given her at their first meeting, like she was a chess piece he was deciding where to place. Laura's hands trembled as she clutched her bouquet. White peonies. She didn't even like peonies. The officiant droned on in Korean. She caught maybe one word in 10. Ji-hoon had promised a translator, but apparently that promise died somewhere between the engagement announcement and today. She nodded when it seemed appropriate, her smile frozen in place, aware that every eye in the room was judging her, measuring her, wondering if the American girl was worthy of their prince. Then came the documents. An assistant appeared beside her with a leather portfolio, flipping it open to reveal page after page of dense Korean text. Ji-hoon leaned close, his cologne expensive and suffocating. "Just sign," he murmured, his tone smooth but leaving no room for argument. "What are they?" Laura whispered back, pen hovering over the first page. "Standard paperwork, formalities." His smile never reached his eyes. "Don't make a scene." She wanted to ask more, wanted to demand a translator, an explanation, something, but 200 people were watching and the weight of their stares pressed down on her like gravity. She thought of her father, of the debt, of the promises made in that study back in Boston. Laura signed, page after page, her hand moving on autopilot, while her mind screamed that this was wrong, that she should stop, that she should run. But where would she run to? The ceremony concluded with mechanical precision. Ji-hoon's mother watched from the front row, her face carved from ice. disappointment radiating from her like cold fog. His father was absent entirely. Business, she'd been told. Always business. Then came the moment Laura had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. The kiss. Surely when Ji-hoon kissed her, when his lips touched hers in front of all these people, something would shift. Some connection would spark. Some tenderness would break through that iron mask he wore. He turned to her, taking her hands. His grip was firm, almost painful. The room held its breath. Ji-hoon leaned in, his mouth beside her ear, close enough that anyone watching would think he was whispering sweet words. His breath was warm against her skin. "Don't embarrass me," he said, each word precise and sharp as a blade. Then he stepped back, raised her hand to his lips in a gesture that looked romantic from a distance, and turned to face their guests. The crowd erupted in polite applause. Laura stood frozen, her hand burning where he'd kissed it, her ear still ringing with his warning. Not "I love you," not "we'll get through this together." Don't embarrass me. She was married now, bound to a man who looked at her like a liability, surrounded by criminals in expensive suits. And she'd just signed documents she couldn't read, in a language she didn't speak, tying herself to a family whose business she was only beginning to understand. What had she actually agreed to? Laura woke before sunrise, restless and drawn by something she couldn't name. The penthouse was too quiet, too cold, and sleep felt impossible when every corner of this place whispered secrets Ji-hoon refused to tell. She padded through the dim hallways in bare feet, following a sliver of pre-dawn light that spilled from beneath a door she'd never noticed before. It was tucked away near the end of the west wing, plain, unmarked, easy to miss. Her hand hesitated on the handle. This is his home, his privacy. But curiosity won, the way it always did, and she pushed the door open. Stone steps spiraled upward, narrow and cool beneath her feet. Her heart quickened as she climbed, half expecting an alarm to sound or Ji-hoon's voice to cut through the silence. But there was nothing. Only the faint scent of something sweet and earthy drifting down from above. When she reached the top and stepped onto the rooftop, Laura froze. It was a garden, not wild or sprawling, but intimate, deliberate. Rows of terracotta pots lined the edges of the space, overflowing with flowers she didn't recognise. Delicate white blooms with papery petals, clusters of soft pink blossoms that swayed in the morning breeze, vines of jasmine winding up a wooden trellis. Everything was meticulously cared for, every leaf healthy, every stem supported. This wasn't neglect, this was devotion. Laura stepped closer, her breath catching. The city stretched out beyond the rooftop in a hazy sprawl of steel and glass, but up here it felt like another world. Peaceful, sacred even. She knelt beside one of the pots, brushing her fingers over the velvety petals of a white flower. There was a small brass plaque half buried in the soil. She tilted it toward the growing light and read the engraved words, "Iomioni's garden, always blooming." Her throat tightened. Iomioni, mother. This wasn't just a garden, this was a shrine. Laura stood slowly, turning in a circle, taking it all in with new eyes. Ji-hoon, cold, controlled, untouchable Ji-hoon, came up here, tended these flowers, kept his mother's memory alive in the only way he knew how, away from everyone, hidden, safe. She felt like an intruder now, but she couldn't make herself leave. There was something heartbreaking about it, something that made her chest ache in a way she hadn't expected. He carried so much and no one ever saw it. No one was allowed to see it. "You're up early?" Laura gasped and spun around. Ji-hoon stood at the top of the stairs, framed by the growing dawn light. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows, dark hair slightly mussed as if he'd just woken. But it was his expression that stopped her cold. No anger, No sharp reprimand, just stillness. A flicker of something unguarded in his eyes, something raw and human that she'd never seen before. "I'm sorry," Laura said quickly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I just found the door and it's all right." His voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. He stepped forward, his gaze moving past her to the flowers, and for a moment, just one fragile, suspended moment, his mouth almost curved into a smile. Almost. Laura's heart stumbled. She wanted to say something, anything, to hold on to this version of him before it disappeared. But she didn't know what words could possibly be enough. Ji-hoon's eyes returned to hers, and she saw it. The exact second the walls came back up. The softness vanished, replaced by that familiar armour, cold and impenetrable. "Breakfast is in 30 minutes, he said, his tone clipped and businesslike once more. "Don't be late." He turned and disappeared down the stairs, leaving Laura alone in the garden with her racing pulse and a single terrifying realisation. She'd just seen the real Ji-hoon, and now she couldn't unsee him. The dining room felt like a battlefield dressed in silk and silver. Laura sat across from Ji-hoon, her hands folded in her lap, trying to make herself small. The silence between them had teeth. Every clink of crystal, every scrape of a knife against porcelain, it all felt amplified, dangerous. Then Min Seo walked in, Ji-hoon's most trusted advisor, the man who'd been at his side for 15 years, the man who never smiled, never faltered, never spoke unless absolutely necessary. Tonight he looked rattled. "Sir," Min Seo said quietly, placing a folder on the table beside Ji-hoon's untouched wine glass. "The quarterly reports from the Hong Kong division, you asked for them before the Seoul meeting." Ji-hoon didn't even glance up. "Leave them." But Min Seo didn't move. He stood there, rigid, like a man about to jump off a cliff. Laura watched him, her pulse quickening. Something was wrong. "Sir," Min Seo said again, his voice tight, "there's something else. The Choi family. They've made another offer, through back channels." Ji-hoon's fork stopped mid-air. The temperature in the room plummeted. "The Choi family," Ji-hoon repeated slowly, each word coated in frost. "Knows better than to approach me." "They used her name," Min Seo said, and Laura heard it, the crack in his voice. They said if you'd listened to So Young back then, none of this would have happened. That she tried to warn you before—" "Enough." Ji-hoon's voice didn't rise. It didn't have to. The single word sliced through the air like a blade. But Min Seo, for reasons Laura couldn't understand, kept talking. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was years of carrying a secret too heavy to hold. Maybe he just broke. "She was your fiancée," Min Seo said, and Laura's world tilted. "You loved her. You trusted her. And she handed you over to the Kang family like you were nothing. 3 of our men died in that ambush because of her. Your brother almost—" "I said enough." This time Ji-hoon stood. The chair scraped back with a violence that made Laura flinch. But she couldn't look away from Min Seo, from the truth spilling out like blood from a wound. "She sold you out," Min Seo whispered, his face pale. "And you've been fighting that war ever since." Laura's heart hammered against her ribs. Suddenly everything made a terrible, tragic kind of sense. The coldness, the distance, the way Ji-hoon looked at her sometimes like she was a threat he hadn't yet neutralised. He wasn't punishing her, he was protecting himself from her. Ji-hoon turned toward the door, his movements sharp, controlled. But Laura saw it, just for a second, the fracture in his armour. His hand gripped the back of the chair so hard his knuckles went white. "Sir, Min Seo started. "Get out." Min Seo bowed and left, the door closing with a soft, damning click. Laura stood slowly, her legs shaking. "Ji-hoon, don't. I need to understand." "You don't need to understand anything." His voice was lethal, empty. This changes nothing. But it changed everything. She took a step toward him, her voice barely a whisper. She hurt you. I understand that, but I'm not her. He turned then, and what Laura saw in his eyes made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't anger, it was pain. Raw, bottomless, suffocating pain. The kind that didn't heal. The kind that turned men into monsters just to survive. You don't know what you're talking about, he said quietly. Then tell me, she pleaded. Let me in. For one fragile, trembling moment, she thought he might, but then his expression shuttered. The walls slammed back into place, higher and thicker than before. Stay out of my way, Laura. He walked out, and Laura stood there in the cold, empty dining room, heart pounding, knowing with absolute certainty she'd just seen the wound that could destroy them both. Laura couldn't do it anymore. She couldn't live in a house that felt like a tomb, couldn't sleep in a bed beside a man who treated her like a ghost. 3 weeks of silence, 3 weeks of cold shoulders and empty stares, 3 weeks of wondering if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. That night, she found herself standing outside his study door, her hand trembling against the dark wood. She could hear the faint rustle of papers inside, the quiet click of his pen. He was always in there, always working, always hiding. Her heart hammered in her chest. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away, to go back to her room and swallow the pain like she'd been taught to do her whole life. But something snapped inside her. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was the realization that dying slowly in silence was worse than whatever truth waited on the other side of that door. She knocked, hard. Come in, his voice came, flat and emotionless. Laura pushed the door open. Ji-hoon sat behind his massive desk, bathed in the amber glow of a single lamp. He didn't look up, didn't acknowledge her, just kept writing, as if she were nothing more than an interruption in his perfectly ordered world. We need to talk, she said, her voice barely steady. I'm busy. I don't care. The words came out sharper than she intended, but she didn't take them back. She stepped into the room, closing the door behind her. I can't do this anymore, Ji-hoon. I can't live like this. Finally, he looked up. His dark eyes met hers, and for just a moment, she thought she saw something flicker there, pain maybe, or regret. But then it was gone, replaced by that infuriating mask of indifference. What do you want from me? He asked quietly. The truth. Her voice cracked, and she hated herself for it. Why did you marry me if you were just going to torture me like this? If you hate me so much, why didn't you just leave me alone? He stood slowly, his jaw tight. I don't hate you. Then what is this? She gestured between them, her eyes burning with unshed tears. What are you doing to me? To us? Every day you look at me like I'm the worst thing that ever happened to you. Every night you turn away from me like I'm poison. So tell me, why? Why marry me if you were just going to punish me? The silence that followed was suffocating. Ji-hoon stared at her, and for the first time since their wedding night, she saw the armour crack. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. His breathing grew heavy. Something dark and tortured swam in his eyes. You want the truth? His voice was rough, almost broken. You can't handle the truth, Laura. Try me. She stepped closer, refusing to back down, even as fear coiled in her stomach. I've handled everything else you've thrown at me. I've handled your silence, your coldness, your cruelty. So tell me, make me understand. He turned away from her, his shoulders tense. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. You remind me of someone. Laura's breath caught. Who? But before he could answer, before he could say the words that might finally explain everything, she asked the question that had been burning in her chest since the day she walked into this house. "Are you punishing me? Ji-hoon?" Her voice trembled. "Or are you punishing yourself?" His entire body went rigid, and in that terrible, electric silence, Laura realised she'd just torn open a wound that had never healed. Ji-hoon didn't come home that night. Laura sat at the kitchen table until dawn, staring at her phone, replaying every conversation they'd had in the last week. Something had shifted in him, something dark and fractured, and she couldn't put her finger on when it started. He'd been pulling away, stone-faced and silent, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like he was running. When he finally walked through the door just after sunrise, his shirt was torn at the shoulder, blood crusted along his knuckles. He didn't look at her, just headed straight for the bathroom like she wasn't even there. "Ji-hoon?" Her voice cracked. "Talk to me." He froze. His hand gripped the doorframe so hard his knuckles went white. For a long moment he didn't move, didn't breathe. "There's nothing to talk about." "That's a lie." She stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "You've been shutting me out for weeks. You disappear for hours. You won't tell me where you've been. And now you come home looking like what?" He spun around, and the fury in his eyes made her step back. "Like the man I actually am? Is that what you were going to say?" Laura's heart hammered in her chest. "No, that's not—" "You don't know me, Laura." His voice was low, venomous. "You think you do, but you don't. You see some broken man you can fix with your kindness and your coffee and your goddamn patience, but that's not who I am." She shook her head, tears burning her eyes. "I've never tried to fix you." "Then what do you call this?" He gestured wildly between them. "What do you call showing up every single day, refusing to leave, acting like I'm worth saving?" "I call it caring about you." The words hung in the air like a grenade. Ji-hoon's jaw clenched. His chest rose and fell with ragged breaths. And for just a second, just one fleeting, unguarded second, she saw the truth written all over his face. He was terrified. "You can't," his voice dropped to a whisper. "You can't care about me." "Why not?" "Because everyone I care about ends up dead." The shout tore out of him like a wound ripping open. "My mother, my brother, everyone I've ever—" He stopped himself, pressing his palms against his eyes. "You don't get it. This isn't some romance where love conquers all. This is my life, and my life destroys people." Laura took a slow step toward him, her voice steady even as her hands trembled. "I'm not afraid of you, Ji-hoon." "You should be." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the pain in his eyes was unbearable. "The families are closing in, rivals who want what I have, enemies who know the fastest way to break me is to take the people I—" He stopped again, shaking his head violently. "They're watching. They know about you." Her blood ran cold. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you need to leave. Tonight. I'll get you somewhere safe, somewhere far away from—" "I'm not going anywhere. Laura, no." She crossed the distance between them, standing so close she could see the exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "I know what I'm risking. I'm choosing to stay." His eyes searched hers, desperate and wild. "Why? Why would you do that?" "Because you're worth it." Something inside him shattered. She saw it happen, the walls he'd built crumbling, the mask slipping, the raw, aching vulnerability bleeding through. "I don't want to need you." His voice broke. "Needing someone is how you get destroyed." Before Laura could respond, his phone buzzed. Once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Ji-hoon's face went pale as he read the screen. "What is it?" Laura whispered. He looked up at her, and the terror in his eyes told her everything. "They're coming." Laura didn't sit down right away. She stood just inside the doorway, fingers curled tight around the strap of her bag, like it was the only thing keeping her upright. The room smelled faintly of old paper and bitter coffee. A thin strip of afternoon light cut across the desk between them, stopping just short of his hands. He hadn't looked up since she walked in. For a second she almost turned around. Almost. Her voice came out softer than she intended. Do you ever realise what it feels like to be ignored by someone you'd run into fire for? Ji-hoon's jaw tightened, but his eyes stayed on the paperwork in front of him. The silence stretched, heavy and deliberate. Laura swallowed. Because that's what you've been doing to me, erasing me, like I don't exist in your world anymore. Still nothing. The quiet scraped against her nerves until the words started spilling out, faster, rougher, fueled by weeks of swallowed hurt. I know you think shutting me out is protecting me. I know you think distance is some kind of shield. But all it's done is make me feel small, disposable. Her chest tightened. She pressed a hand against it, like she could physically hold herself together. When you walk past me without looking, when you don't answer my messages, when you disappear for hours and come back like I'm furniture in the room, it doesn't make me feel safe, Ji-hoon. It makes me feel like I'm worth nothing. That finally got him, his pen stilled, his shoulders lifted slightly like he'd been struck. Laura took a step closer, her voice trembling now, unguarded. You think danger is knives and bullets and men who want to hurt you. But invisibility? A bitter laugh slipped out. That's its own kind of prison. And it's worse. At least in a cell, someone knows you're there. Her eyes burned, but she forced herself to stay steady. I'd rather face fear with you than feel erased by you. Ji-hoon slowly raised his head. The mask he usually wore, the controlled calm, the emotional distance, was cracked wide open. His eyes searched her face like he was trying to read a language he didn't trust himself to understand. You don't mean that, he said quietly. I do. You don't understand what you're asking for. I'm not asking for safety, she said. I'm asking to matter. The words settled between them, fragile and irreversible. He pushed his chair back slightly, the legs scraping the floor in a nervous tell she'd learned to recognise. His hands flattened on the desk, knuckles pale. You think you're invisible to me? He asked, disbelief threaded with pain. Laura, you are the loudest thing in my life. Her breath caught. When you're quiet. I hear you anyway, he continued. When you leave a room it feels wrong. When you smile at me like you don't know what you're doing to me. It ruins my control. He dragged a hand through his hair. That's why I pull away, because if I don't, I won't survive it. She shook her head slowly. That's not survival. That's hiding. Hiding keeps people alive. No, she whispered. It keeps them alone. The word lingered like a confession neither of them could take back. Laura's hands started to shake. She didn't hide it. I've spent my life being the quiet one, the easy one, the one people forget when something louder comes along. When you started seeing me, really seeing me, it felt like someone opened a window in a locked room. Her voice cracked. And when you closed it again, it felt like suffocating. Ji-hoon stared at her like she'd named something he'd been running from. You think you're the only one risking something here, she said. Every time I stay when you give me a reason to leave, I'm choosing vulnerability over comfort. I'm choosing you. His breathing grew uneven. The air between them felt stretched thin by too much truth. You could lose everything, he said. So could you. Their eyes locked. In that suspended moment, neither of them had armour left. No distance, no safe lies. Just two people standing at the edge of something that could change everything. Ji-hoon's gaze dropped to her hands. For a heartbeat, Laura thought he was pulling away again. The familiar ache flared in her chest. Then his hand moved, slowly, carefully, like he was reaching for something fragile enough to break if he breathed too hard. His fingers crossed the space between them and closed around hers. His touch trembled, not with control, not with certainty, with fear, with need, with surrender. Laura inhaled sharply as the warmth of his skin grounded her. His grip wasn't tight, but it was desperate, like letting go might undo him. He didn't look up right away. When he finally did, his eyes were unguarded in a way she'd never seen before, and Laura understood this wasn't just a touch. It was a risk, a promise, a crack in the walls that might never close again. The first shot shattered the window before either of them could breathe. Glass exploded inward like a storm of knives. Laura screamed as Ji-hoon spun, yanking her off the chair and slamming her against his chest. The world collapsed into noise, alarms screaming, boots pounding somewhere beyond the walls, the deep concussion of gunfire tearing through the night. "Down," he barked, already moving. They hit the floor hard. Ji-hoon twisted his body over hers, one arm braced against the ground, the other shielding her head as more glass rained down. The smell of smoke and dust filled her lungs. Somewhere, metal screamed as something heavy crashed through a gate. Laura's heart slammed so violently she thought it might burst. Her fingers clutched the front of his shirt, anchoring herself to the only solid thing left in a world that had turned into chaos. "Don't move," he said against her hair, voice tight with controlled fury. "No matter what you hear." Another blast shook the walls. Lights flickered. A spray of plaster dust coated their faces. She felt it then, the way his body subtly shifted to take the impact zones, how he angled his shoulder toward the doorway, how his spine curved around her like armor. He wasn't hiding her. He was offering himself. The realization burned through her fear with terrifying clarity. A sharp crack split the air, followed by a violent jolt. Ji-hoon grunted. His weight pressed harder against her for half a second before he caught himself on his forearm. "Ji-hoon?" Her voice came out broken. "I'm fine," he lied immediately. Warmth soaked through the fabric beneath her palm. Blood. Her stomach dropped. "Don't!" He stopped her when she tried to move. "Stay down." More shots echoed farther away now, muffled by distance and walls. Shouting followed, orders barked. Then slowly the noise began to retreat, like a storm pulling back into the horizon. Minutes stretched like hours. Ji-hoon finally lifted his weight off her, breathing hard. His face was pale beneath the grime, jaw clenched against pain. A dark bloom spread across his side where the bullet had torn through muscle. Laura pushed up on shaky arms. "You're bleeding." He gave a rough half smile. "I've had worse." She pressed her hand against the wound without thinking, panic and instinct tangling together. "You're not allowed to die," she whispered fiercely. "I just got you back." His eyes locked onto hers. Something shifted there. Not adrenaline, not fear, something deeper and unprotected. Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Smoke drifted through the broken windows, illuminated by flickering emergency lights. The room looked like a battlefield, overturned furniture, shattered glass, bullet scars chewing into the walls. The world they knew had been torn open. Ji-hoon reached up slowly, cupping her cheek with trembling fingers. Blood streaked across her skin, warm and real. "I was wrong," he said quietly. She stilled. His voice shook, stripped of armor and pride and every defense he'd ever worn. "You were never the transaction, never the mistake. You were always the risk I was too afraid to take." Laura's breath hitched like a sob caught halfway out. "I thought control would keep you safe," he continued. "I thought distance made me strong, but all it did was teach me how to lose you without even fighting." Tears blurred her vision. "You didn't lose me." "No," he said softly. "I almost did." Their foreheads touched, breaths mingling. the wreckage of the world pressing in around them. His hand slid into her hair, anchoring himself like he needed proof she was real. The kiss wasn't gentle, it was desperate and bruised and alive. A collision of relief and fear and everything they'd been holding back. Laura clutched his jacket as if he might disappear if she let go. His mouth moved against hers like he was relearning how to breathe. The taste of smoke and salt and blood didn't matter. Only the fact that he was here, alive, choosing her. When they finally pulled apart, both of them shaking, Ji-hoon rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed like the weight of survival had finally landed. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The compound groaned around them, distant alarms fading, wind whispering through broken glass, the slow settling of destruction. Laura shifted closer, curling into his side despite the pain in his body. He wrapped his arm around her carefully, protective even now, even wounded. They sat there amid the ruins, holding each other while the world recalibrated itself around what had almost been lost. The danger wasn't gone. The future was still uncertain. Nothing about their lives had suddenly become easy. But for the first time since the darkness found them, neither of them was alone. You have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan. The first thing Laura noticed was the laughter. Not loud, not careless, just soft, unexpected. Drifting down the stone corridor like sunlight, finding a crack in concrete. 6 months ago, this place had felt like a tomb. Every footstep echoed with tension, every door closed like a warning. Now it breathed. She leaned against the balcony railing and watched the courtyard below come alive with quiet movement. Guards exchanging jokes over coffee, a mechanic wiping grease from his hands while humming off-key, the cook arguing cheerfully with a delivery driver. The fortress was still armed, still alert, still dangerous to anyone who meant harm. But it wasn't cold anymore. Ji-hoon stood beside her, sleeves rolled up, phone tucked away for once, the hard lines of command softened by something that looked dangerously close to peace. A faint scar peeked from beneath his collar where the bullet had kissed him months ago, a reminder neither of them forgot. "You're staring," he said without looking at her. "I'm memorizing," she replied, "in case this ever feels unreal." He turned toward her then, studying her face the way he always did now, not like a puzzle to solve or a risk to calculate, but like something precious that required attention. 6 months ago, she'd been an outsider here, a fragile presence surrounded by steel and secrecy. She'd learned quickly which corridors to avoid during briefings, how to read the unspoken signals between his men, how to distinguish real danger from controlled tension. She learned how to stand her ground without challenging the hierarchy, how to ask questions that mattered, how to move with awareness instead of fear. More importantly, she'd learned she didn't have to disappear to belong. Ji-hoon had learned too. He no longer hovered in doorways watching her like disaster waited behind every corner. He didn't vanish for days without explanation. He didn't mistake silence for protection. When trouble surfaced, and it always did in his world, he let her see the truth instead of locking it behind walls. Protecting her hadn't meant pushing her away. It had meant trusting her to stand beside him. She reached for his hand without thinking. He laced his fingers through hers easily, naturally, a gesture that once would have felt impossible. "You're calmer," she teased gently. He snorted. "Don't tell the men that. They'll think I've gone soft." "You have," she said, smiling. "Just not where it counts." His thumb brushed over her knuckles, slow and grounding. "You changed the air in this place." She glanced back at the courtyard. "You did." A breeze stirred her hair. The sun hovered low, painting the stone walls gold instead of grey. For a moment the future didn't feel like a battlefield waiting to happen. It felt like a possibility. "You ever miss the quiet life?" he asked suddenly. "Before all this?" She thought about it. The small apartment, the predictable routines, the safety that had once felt like enough. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I don't miss who I was when I was hiding from living." He nodded slowly, understanding more than she expected. "I don't miss who I was either." The words carried weight, not regret, release. They stood there for a while, letting the silence settle comfortably between them instead of cutting like a blade. Ji-hoon shifted, his expression turning oddly serious. His free hand slid into his pocket. "Laura." Her heart lifted slightly. Something in his tone carried intention. He withdrew a small velvet pouch and placed it in her palm. The fabric was warm from his body heat. Her fingers curled around it instinctively. "What is this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside rested a delicate silver pendant shaped like a tiny key. Simple, elegant, quietly powerful. Her breath caught. "A key?" she whispered. He watched her face carefully, vulnerability flickering behind his eyes. A look she'd learned meant he was standing emotionally unarmed. "You unlocked something I thought was dead," he said softly. "I'm never locking it again." Emotion surged through her chest so fast it almost stole her breath. Her fingers closed around the pendant like it might dissolve if she didn't hold it tight enough. "Ji-hoon." Her voice trembled despite herself. He lifted the chain and stepped closer, brushing her hair aside as he fastened it around her neck. His touch lingered at her skin, grounding and reverent. The pendant rested just above her heart, a promise, a future, a door that would never close again. She leaned into him, forehead touching his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Not the frantic pulse of fear anymore, but something strong and alive and steady. Below them, the fortress continued its quiet motion. Life unfolding inside stone walls, once built only for survival. The world was still dangerous, enemies still existed. Nothing about his reality had magically softened. But love had changed the temperature of it. Laura lifted her head, meeting his gaze with a smile that carried both peace and courage. "Then we'd better be careful what we unlock next." His lips curved slowly, eyes darkening with a familiar spark. "Careful has never been our strength." She laughed softly, resting her hand over the key at her throat. And somewhere deep inside the fortress, a door shifted, not closing, but opening wider. You have not enough humanizer words left. Upgrade your surfer plan. Sometimes the greatest danger isn't the world outside, it's the walls we build inside our own hearts. Laura taught us that love isn't about fixing someone or saving them. It's about choosing to stay present, even when fear tells you to run. It's about knowing your worth, even when someone else's silence makes you feel invisible. Ji-hoon learned that protecting someone doesn't mean locking them out. Real strength comes from trust, vulnerability, and letting someone stand beside you instead of behind you. And maybe the biggest lesson of all, it's never too late to unlock the parts of yourself you thought were gone forever. If this story touched your heart, reminded you of your own courage, or made you believe in second chances again, thank you for watching. Your time matters, your heart matters, your story matters too. We'll see you in the next video.